Greetings, magnificent souls, to the Lily Bewley podcast, where we have open and honest discussions about ourselves. This is your host, Lily Bewley, and I'm honored to have conversations here with thought leaders, visionaries, healers, and even solo conversations with myself about things I am currently reflecting on. This is a place where we break down, break away, and break through our emotional trauma, allowing ourselves to be healthy, be happy, and live a peaceful life. We are tired of being sick and tired. We are tired, but we are not giving up. We know that there is something magnificent inside of us. And because we are fighting daily, hourly, and by the minute, fighting ourselves, our kids, our spouses, we have to do things differently. We have to break the cycle. We don't have a million chances. We have to be happy now. We have to find a way. So how do we do that? How is that possible? If you look around at what society is telling you, they tell you that what we're doing is impossible. Yet it's happening every single day. And it's happening through the practice and the love that we call awakening the magnificent soul. We are all magnificent souls, and these are our stories of healing. Today in episode 102, I welcome Larissa Harrington to the show to chat about holistic approaches to abundance and what that means. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts about this episode or anything you would like me to cover on future podcasts at epiphanyvault.com. Remember, it is a safe place, and I would welcome the discussion. And also a request, if you are enjoying the show, please rate and share and review so we can get the word out to more and more souls who want to heal. And on to the show today. My guest, Larissa Harrington's mission is to empower clients to receive and reach their personal and professional goals while living happier and healthier lives. Larissa is the owner and founder of Strong by Nature LLC. She's a 20-year Air Force veteran, wife, and mother of two. She has a deep understanding of how unmanaged stress and anxiety affect all aspects of life, and she believes that well-being encompasses all of the things: mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, and environmental components. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Larissa Harrington. Larissa, you're my peeps. I'm so happy to have you here and have this conversation here today.
Me too. I just always love talking to you, and now we just have a recording conversation.
Yeah. It's kind of like that we're sitting on the couch at home, just chatting with our mics. So here we are. I've known you for a while now, and we've been through some similar programs together. And I love the way that you show up and you talk about, what's passionate for you. And that's a lot about burnout, a lot about recovery from burnout. And so what I wanted to start with today, which is, tell me a little bit about like how you perceive burnout. And I have some thoughts about this too, but I want you to go first.
Yeah. What a great question. How do I perceive burnout? Like this chronic exhaustion. And what I find though is using this term burnout, it's just kind of this term that's thrown around. But really, this exhaustion that I see clients coming with is sometimes not like actually burnout. It's really the exhaustion just from life and not having clear boundaries and not believing that they're worthy of self-care and all these other things that lead to this exhaustion. But right, technically when they're talking about burnout, it's this exhaustion that comes from work. But what I find so often is it's all of the stuff outside of work that's actually leading to this exhaustion. And so where my passion lies is really helping people understand why they're feeling the way that they're feeling and giving them, hope that it doesn't have to always be that way and that something else is possible for them.
Oh my God.
And it's just, so beautiful when you see those like aha moments for people where they actually like, oh, this is what it feels like to not feel exhausted, or this is what it feels like to be enough.
Yes.
Right? Like it's just beautiful seeing those transformations.
Yes. And that has been a transformation for me in my development and my healing. And the thing that gets me about when people talk about stress and when people talk about burnout, And I don't know if this gets you too, but it gets me when people joke about this. Like it's kind of like in a joking way. It's kind of like in this joking way of like, oh yeah, I'm burnt out. And I think like what you just said is like that's like so on in line with my values too, which is like there is a better way. Like if we're feeling this like
Mhm.
exhaustion when we're coming home and we're juggling all these things and just feeling like we come last, maybe. That people joke about
Mhm.
that. And it makes me like compassionately
Yeah.
angry because it doesn't have to be that way. Like we don't have to suffer in life so hard. Would you agree with that?
Oh my gosh. Yes, because it's been normalized. Whenever I go and do workshops and, I'm speaking to large rooms and I bring up this normalization of like Netflix and wine and, right, saying, oh, I don't have time for self care. But in reality, it's like, how are we choosing to, not how are we choosing, how are we spending our time? Because a lot of times it's not this like conscious choice. It's like, I'm
Mhm.
just so overwhelmed that I can't possibly think about doing anything differently. But yeah, it's this culture that's been created where
Mm.
that's just what people talk about, and nobody like steps in and says, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. People are just talking about it with their friends like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, I am exhausted and burnt out and I need wine to go to sleep at night, and then I can't sleep and all I want to do is lay around and watch TV and eat candy,
Mm.
without recognizing like there are things there that need to be addressed. Like,
Mhm.
this is just the way that it is right now, right? We all have to do this. And you go and speak in large rooms and everybody is like, oh yeah, that's just how my life is. It's like, it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be that way. Like, how are
Yeah.
all of you just talking about, oh yeah, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. This is a question that's coming up for me that I don't know that we've discussed offline before, but how did you kind of get to this place? Was it something that
Mhm.
it was a revolution and metamorphosis from a place that you were in when you were in this state of like juggling all the everythings and the whatnots, and that was just the way life was? Like, how did you kind of get to this point where you're a master teacher of burnout prevention?
Yeah, what an interesting question. I don't know when it was like it actually happened for me. So I was in the military
Mm-hmm.
for 20 years. I was doing this health and wellness work on the side part time. Then I was doing it for the military. And I was working around lots of high achievers, lots of really smart people who were struggling with these things. And so it was the more that I was learning and getting lots of training and education on these kind of topics around mental health and wellness, stress management, all those things. And then I was seeing it every day with the people around me.
Mm-hmm.
And then also being in this place myself of like being mostly okay because I had these tools and I was, what I thought taking care of myself and working with people who were struggling and overwhelmed. And little by little, I started to realize that I was kind of neglecting my health a bit. I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm sleeping enough and I'm eating these healthy foods and I'm doing like all the checkbox things that you're supposed to do to be healthy. But I was still exhausted because it was more of this like, okay, these supposed to eat salads and get 7 to 8 hours of sleep and exercise every day, like these are the things you're supposed to do to be healthy, and I'm checking all those boxes. But I was also really working really hard in my full-time job and then doing this work also on the side
Mm-hmm.
and having two small kids and a husband. And it was like my days were so just packed full of stuff that I wasn't really making time for what I passionately talk about now, like the fun and spaciousness
Mm-hmm.
and just like actual rest. It was like go, 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 go. Okay, I'm gonna be in bed at this time so I can make sure I get enough sleep, right? And like leading up to that place where I wouldn't say that I was burned out, but I was definitely on that verge of like, this is not sustainable and I don't feel good. I'm like teaching this stuff all the time.
Mm,
I'm doing the things that you're supposed to do, but I don't actually feel good because in my head, I had a lot of what I didn't realize at the time, but a lot of those struggles with feeling like enough and like that I wasn't doing enough and that there were so many people struggling worse than me. So how could I possibly complain? And
mm,
it's selfish for me to not want to work late or to help people who were in need. And so, yeah, I got to that place and then I don't know what that switch point was for me,
mm,
but it was all of a sudden I had retired from the military. I was working at another, organization doing meaningful work. And it was like this, I can't keep going like this or I
mm,
will burn out. And so finally I just quit my full-time high paying job and said I need a break for myself, but I also want to do this other work full time.
mhm.
And so it got to that place where it was like money wasn't as important as my mental and physical and emotional and spiritual health and well-being. So, okay, we're just going to make it work with me quitting my job, shifting to doing this full time. And it was just such a huge like weight off of my shoulders
Mm.
to not I enjoyed the job that I was doing, but I was commuting 2 hours a day and working two jobs and trying to be a good mom and wife.
Yeah, wow.
So it was that just shift for me to say money isn't as important as how I'm feeling. And I started, right, I was making less money, but I actually started investing more money in
Mhm.
my own health and well-being. Instead of before, I would spend a lot of money on trainings and certifications. It was all that like the brain stuff, like, oh, I
Mhm.
have to learn more. There's all these people in need. So I'm going to invest all my extra time and money into learning more about how I can help other people versus that shift for me is like, I'm still going to do that because I love learning and I'm going to invest time and money in me, like actually getting that care and support uh, to where I am now, where I still invest a lot of money and having lots of different healers and mentors and support for myself
Mhm.
because having a lot of money in the bank wasn't really going to fulfill me the same way as me like truly taking care of myself.
Yeah. Mm. Mm. It's such a balance. It's such a balance. That's what I've kind of learned, or I am learning. I don't think I'm ever going to stop learning. Is
Yeah.
really like how to get to that next level, right? And with whatever, wherever we are, how to get to that next level of impact or relationship or what have you, but then also take care of ourselves, like what you're saying is like pay the bills, have a family, be a good mom. Like, wow. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I that's my life is like really just constantly trying to test and find my equilibrium.
Yeah. And
Mm,
I love that you said that because I think that's where we should all be, right? It is that kind of constant experiment and noticing, which we talk about a lot, and not where I was for a long time. It's like, but I'm doing all the things that you're supposed to do to be
mhm,
healthy, right? I'm doing the things, so it's fine. I'm fine. It's okay.
mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
talk about this so much too. And the moral of the story, y'all, if you're listening, is that what if what we have been told for what to do was wrong? Like, what if that there is like Larissa's
Mhm.
saying, like a different way? And yeah, it's like that whole mentality, the hustle culture and everything that you've just been talking about of this, like, you know, we as I know you coach both men and women, but I think women in particular feel that pressure to carry all of this weight in relationship, and we have these opportunities which are great in business and to have impact and to have organization, um and again, like it just seems like the pattern is that the priority of ourselves just keeps like going low and low and lower down the list. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And, going back to what we were talking about earlier with that culture of, just burnout being normalized. And I also think how we talk about self-care, where they're starting to have those conversations
Mm,
more like, oh, self-care, but not for me. A lot of what people talk about as self-care isn't self-care, right? Like, where I love that definition, we're taking action to preserve or improve our health, but you have to have that moment to moment awareness and noticing to say, is this improving or preserving my health? Right? When you think about eating a salad or getting a certain amount of sleep at night, just because it's self-care for one person might not be self-care for another person. Like, you eating a salad might actually make you feel like crap, and you might have some food sensitivities or allergies to what you're eating,
mm,
and you end up feeling worse, but you're saying, "Oh, I'm taking care of myself because I'm eating this salad.
mhm.
I'm doing these things because this is what I've been told I'm supposed to do," instead of like really recognizing, is this thing that I'm doing, is this thought or belief taking care of me and my health and well-being? Is it preserving or improving my health or well-being?
Mhm.
Is me going to get my nails done, is that how I should be investing my time and money and energy? Is that preserving or improving my health and well-being?
Mm.
And how many people lie about, I don't, like, they're lying to themselves, I don't have time, right? Most of us, we have time that we're not using as effectively,
Mhm.
sufficiently as we could be, because we're not coming from that place of like true awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I have that same I frame it a little bit differently, but I have that same, I guess, gripe with the self-love and self-care, which is like it's this weird thing for me of like I know it's good and I know that without self-love or self-care, we will go into these states that we're talking about. And that's something I want to kind of transition into too. But it's like what I don't know, it's like this weird thing of like it's not just what we see other people doing on Instagram. Like go, like getting your nails done can be
Yeah.
awesome, right? And to be real, like that is something that I did for myself and I felt like it was self-care, but then I realized like going to the nail salon is really a traumatic event for me. Like it's loud, it's not fun. You have to sit in the same place for 3 hours or whatever it is. And I realized like for me, y'all, it wasn't really great. So what I found ways to work around it, like what you're talking about is like there actually, there can be better ways to get to the point that we want to get to, but it does take some
Yeah.
awareness and like some internal assessment as to like what works. Is this for me or is this for somebody else? Women, ladies, is this for me or is it for somebody else? Right? Like this is a deep question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. I don't know if I've talked about this yet here, so I'm happy that we're having this conversation. Um,
Yeah.
so what are some like major signs? I know we talked a little bit about it through our conversation so far, but I want to really be explicit about this. So what are some major signs for people, you know, physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, however you want to go, for people that may be experiencing burnout and they don't really know?
Yeah. So I'll give some signs, some common signs, not just specifically for burnout, but really it's this chronic, uh, and I don't even want to say stress as a bad word, right? Because a lot of times we think about, oh, I'm so stressed, or there's all these things that are stressful,
Mm,
where we're turning stress into a bad thing where it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. So it's more like this chronic overwhelm, and I'll talk about signs like that something needs to change,
mm,
right? Whether it's from compassion fatigue or
mm,
burnout or just exhaustion with your right, your stay-at-home mom and you're exhausted with your kids all the time, whatever it is, right? But when we're noticing things like difficulty staying asleep or falling asleep. When you're noticing those shifts and maybe how you are responding to certain situations where you're a little more irritable or cranky, or you're doing and saying things that you later regret. When you're noticing that you have a change in how you're taking in food, right? Are you eating more than you were before? Are you eating less? Are you having digestive issues? Or you're not using the bathroom regularly? Like, those are some things that we need to be aware of. When we're looking at either just losing interest in doing things that used to be exciting for us, right? Because there's that, like, that good stress of like, oh, I'm excited about this thing. It's a little stressful to all use for myself going and doing a presentation, right? There's always that little bit of stress for me, like going and presenting in a new space with new people. And so that difference would be then, is that something that used to be exciting for me? And now I don't have any interest in doing it anymore. Right. And so I think, so those are just some things, but going back to what we were talking about before with the awareness piece, when people are not practicing that awareness and just not noticing, we might overlook those little shifts that might be happening. And so we just want to be aware of, for ourselves and other, loved ones or people that we work with, like noticing, this just doesn't feel right for me. Like, something is different. Why do I continue like getting upset at my, dog for barking at the mailman, right? Just an example. Why is all of a sudden this thing feels just super awful to me, and I'm super pissed at my dog for barking at the mailman when I used to not be? Why is it that now all of a sudden when I'm eating this food, it gives me diarrhea, right? Why now I wake up every night at 2 a.m. and have nonstop thoughts and anxiety, and I can't go back to sleep? We have to be aware of these small things so that they don't become big things.
Exactly.
But when we're in that constant state of overwhelm, we're not taking time for daily reflection. Like, I love, talking to people about having some sort of mindfulness practice, daily, morning routine, evening routine, where we're just taking that time to check in and then using that as a practice so that we're doing it throughout the day, so we can notice those things that just feel off and that we don't allow them to just become something much bigger to where, we are actually burnt out. We're in the hospital because we just haven't taken care of ourselves enough. When we blow up at someone and ruin a meaningful relationship and say things that we can't take back because we've just let so much stuff build up. So we just have to be able to pay attention to those little signs, those messages that our body is telling us something's not okay, right? Something needs to change. But, primarily, I think you and I both work with the same types of people. And it's those mostly women who really care about taking care of others. And they're really like amazing and intelligent and nurturing women who struggle with things like boundaries and recognizing their own needs, or they recognize them, but they're not addressing them because they're just so caring and loving and amazing and beautiful human beings. And then there's that struggle then of like, who am I if I'm not this caregiver? Who am I if I'm not this person who takes care of others? Right? Who am I if I'm not the one that can be strong when other people are suffering or somebody needs something done at work? And so there's just so much that goes into like how we get to that place of, overwhelm, exhaustion, because of those beliefs that so many women have, or their identity and who they are and what's good enough if they're not a certain way.
Yes. That hit deep when you said, who are we if we don't have to care for these people. And I just got this, and I don't even know if this analogy is right, y'all. So I'm open to be wrong, but whatever, like, it's like the superwoman, you have superwoman, this archetype of a superwoman, and kryptonite is like other people, which it's weird. I don't even know. Again, I can be wrong about that analogy. I'm not like all up in that space, but it just feels like it's like other people are great. When you're talking about boundaries, like having other people in our lives, it's like a necessity, right? For all, I would argue all of us. Some people would disagree, but I would argue all of us. And through all of this, like what we're talking about, like conditioning and maybe stuff that's happened to us in the past, and maybe a lot of sacrifices that we've had to make to be a professional or a high achiever or an impact maker or something like that. I feel like what you're saying, we start to lose ourselves in a way. Like, who are we without this? Like, that is a deep, deep question. Like deep, like who am I without being the caretaker of this business, this family, this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I love that.
Yeah, because I see that even in women who don't have children of their own, it's just who they are, their identity.
All of that.
Around, I'll have people say, oh, I can't talk to anybody about my problems because all my friends and all my family always call me, right? I'm the one that they can talk to. I'm the strong one. I'm the one who always has their stuff together. And so what I see more than anything, it's those are the ones who are really the ones struggling because they have this like facade of everything being okay, right? But in reality, they are struggling, but they can't tell anybody about it because this identity that's been created is they can handle it all.
Yeah.
And people need them.
Yeah. Wow, that's deep. Yeah. Man, I was that woman for a long time. I'm glad I'm not anymore though, because I do feel a lot more aligned. That's for sure.
Yeah. How did you get out of that place?
For me, it was a lot of healing. It was healing. There's really no other word for me to describe it. It was healing the parts of me that was the mediator for my family. That was her role. It was the parts of me that saw weakness as vulnerability as weakness, right? The parts of me that, giving those parts of me that I'd never really looked at or given a voice. And it was, over time, it's not like a snap your finger, at least for me, it wasn't like a snap your finger type of thing. But over time with healing, that's kind of how I got there. Yeah. Deep.
And as you're talking about this, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from everybody else that I've talked to, that stuff is so uncomfortable and so hard to shift into that place, like where we get that deep healing.
It is.
And so I think a lot of people are scared to go to that place, right? Where they're actually doing that deep healing, things that, might have been with them for years and decades.
Yeah. And I think like part of, at least the way I see it, part of your value and part of my value is like, I don't want people listening to have to go through the pain that I went through to have to get to this place. Like what you're talking about is like, you don't really know when it clicked for you, but something clicked in you that was like, is it really supposed to be like this? And like, for me, it was like a really, really dark place. I don't know if we've ever talked about this offline, but it was a really, 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 really dark place that I had to go to for me to even like, to be open to like, this doesn't feel right. So I think like part of our value is to like to pinpoint the road that someone may be going down that they didn't know that they can veer off. Like there's an exit, y'all. There's an exit, to get off this highway of like you're saying, like exhaustion and all this stuff. So yeah. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. And, most people that start to work with me, it is because they've gotten to that
Yeah.
dark place, like
Mhm.
something really bad has happened, which is why I'm more visible and vocal about this now than I have been in the past, because I really want people to take action before they get to that place,
Mm.
right? It's so much harder when you're in that like deep, dark place to
Mhm.
come up out of it. Then what I want for people is that we just start paying attention sooner and start taking action sooner instead of waiting until a doctor tells you that something has to change or your
Yeah.
partner tells you that something has to change,
Yeah.
because that's most of the time when people are willing to, for me and my experience of working with people, that's when they're finally willing to invest that time, money, and energy, because they feel like it's okay, I can keep going like this a little longer, it's not that bad, even though they're struggling and
Mhm.
unhappy and don't feel good.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was something I wanted to segue into. So thank you for leading me that way, which is, so say we have, like there are things like we're listening to this and we're having, like Larissa's directly talking to me like, oh, why does she see me? It hurts so bad. Like, what is like a next one step or action that we can take if we are starting to be aware of these things that you're talking about?
I think if I understand what you're asking correctly, um, if somebody were just listening to this out there, hey
Mhm.
y'all, thanks for listening. But right, if you're listening to
Yes.
this out there, you're like, oh wow, she's talking about me, like things are not okay.
Yeah.
I think checking in with ourselves and saying, well, I love the practice of, visualizing the life of your dreams. Like,
Mm,
what do I actually want from my life? What parts aren't where they need to be right now?
mm,
And to say, what kind of support do I need?
mm,
Because sometimes what I find with people is they're like, things don't feel good, but they don't know where to go next.
mhm,
And so having that time to just do a check-in with themselves and say, what do I actually need? And for most people, that's not even clear. And so having somebody else to kind of bounce ideas off. I have a lot of conversations with people, just those clarity calls
mhm,
of like, hey, when things feel really overwhelming, and you don't know where to go, like let's kind of unravel that yarn that's just kind of all over the place,
mhm,
to say, what direction do I need to go and what kind of support do I need?
mhm,
So I love doing that with people. And I would just say, find someone that you feel comfortable with and that you trust to have that conversation, to be able to figure out what isn't working for me and what kind of support do I need.
mhm,
Because I've had some people that it's like, okay, well, let's connect you with a therapist. Let's
mhm,
connect you with AA. Like,
mhm,
let's connect you with a functional medicine practitioner. Like, figuring out who you need to be connected with can be a really important first step, because what happens so often is that there's just that overwhelm of, I don't know what to do. I know this doesn't feel good, but I don't know what to do. So I'm not going to do anything.
yeah, and you continue the same pattern of trying to do it on your own.
Right.
Mhm,
Like if it hasn't worked, you trying to do it on your own, maybe something needs to change and maybe stop trying
mhm,
to do it on your own. Right.
mhm,
What is that? And Maston always says, what you struggle with the most is what you struggle with alone.
mhm,
Like, we're meant to be in community.
mhm,
And I consider myself an expert, and I've been in this space for over 20 years.
mhm,
And I still have a whole team of people to support me
exactly.
that are experts in different spaces and
Yeah.
help me see blind spots and help me with healing. Because for me, I recognize that it's something I want to continue doing for the rest of my life. I want to continue learning, and me learning what I can to help support other people and myself. And I want to also have support to continue supporting me
Mhm,
so I can continue feeling the way I want to feel
mhm,
and live in the life of my dreams.
exactly. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I talk a lot about support here too. And that's what I always say is that if it's not me, find someone, find someone that can see things that you're not seeing. And, I've
Mhm.
had a couple like really amazing therapists on the podcast as well. And what you just said kind of ties into something that's coming up for me is that, um, like like, I don't know, there's so many things bubbling now, but like the safety of the practitioner is important. Like you said, like someone that you
Mhm.
trust or that you're open to trusting. Um, and like, is that person also doing their work? Because a lot of times, especially in the coaching world, there's a lot of, I don't know, I would say like maybe dysregulation, not in the form of
Mhm.
policing the coaching world, which who knows what will happen with that, but just in the form of like, is the person that you're asking for support, are they supported? Um, like, do they practice what they preach and all that stuff? So, and that goes for
Mhm.
therapists as well as coaches.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. I just remember a podcast that I released recently, and we talked a lot about that. But I love that what you're saying too, because I preach about that because support is literally what changed my life. It really is
Mhm.
being able to accept and receive support. And granted, I did it on my own. I healed on my own for a long time, but then I also like hit a wall in reaching my goals or reaching the relationships and the feelings with myself. Like I hit a wall and I just started to notice these things in my life that like wouldn't go away. And I'm like, there's something wrong here. And so that's when I started to be open to something different.
Yeah. And I think, what you just talked about with doing the healing on your own and hitting the wall and then needing to do something different. And I think that's where people get stuck so often
Mhm.
is because they're not recognizing that it's okay to pivot and change and try something new when what you're doing isn't working. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you're a failure or maybe you're a failure, but failure is not a bad word, right? It's
Mhm.
not bad to have something not work out. And then we say, okay, what can we learn about this?
Mhm.
And what's the direction of my dreams? How do I want to feel? Like, okay, let's try something new.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so one more question before we wrap up, but I wanted to talk about, you talk a lot about peace and clarity. Would you say that that
Mhm.
would be, is that the end goal for you slash people that you work with? What is in your mind and in your body? Like, what is this peace and clarity that you wish the whole world could have?
Yeah. Is that the end for what I want for people? Yes.
Yeah.
A peace, right? And like for people to be able to live this life of abundance and
Mhm.
we talk about my vision and that everybody is using their gifts to make a positive impact in the world
Mhm.
while they are also experiencing a life of freedom, peace, and joy.
Mhm.
And right, for me, I want to work with and support people who have a mission that they want to do good in the world,
Mhm.
that they want to use their gifts to make a difference. Because I find that those people very often get burned out and it keeps them then from doing the work that they really feel called to do and helping people recognize like it is actually possible. You can do amazing, meaningful work and experience freedom, peace, and joy, right? And we just need the clarity to figure out what that is for us
Yep.
and that we don't need to do it alone,
Mhm.
that we don't need to do everything. We can have it all, but we don't need to do it all, right? Like that's what I talk to people about. You can have it
Mhm.
all. You can have a relationship and a job you love and have your health, but you don't have to be the one to do it all. We have an amazing like housekeeping team that comes to support us. We
Mhm.
get meals delivered. We
Mhm.
have like all sorts of support like in our home to help me continue doing what I love. I have a team to support me,
Mhm.
amazing people to
Mhm.
help support my vision. Right? Like I know what I want out of life and I want other people to recognize you don't have to be the one to do everything.
Mhm.
And there's so much more peace that comes from allowing yourself to be supported.
Yes. Oh, yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Same, all the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
It is an amazing feeling, I must say. So like we talk about, I kind of like to wrap it up with love and relationships, and we've talked a little bit about
Mhm.
boundaries. Um, what would you say? I don't know, what do you see most in your clients, or even if your own personal journey about the relationship with boundaries, I guess, because we haven't really talked about that a whole lot. Is it, I like to talk about energetic boundaries, which can be time, it can be all of these things, but I'm curious on how, like, what's your take on maybe why it's so hard or why it's important?
Hmm. I think kind of going back to what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago of the identities of many people around being the caregivers and doing everything for
Mhm,
everyone,
mhm,
where oftentimes there's that people haven't even acknowledged what their boundaries are or what they want them to be.
mm,
Part of which can come from have had them people who have had them not respected in the past, or coming from like worthiness of us being able to even have boundaries, or being okay with having boundaries. Like there's lots of different things of how they come up. But what I find so often with my clients is that when you're talking about love and relationships specifically, that's not something that they come to me for,
mhm.
but it almost always comes up.
Yes,
Like once we start doing that deeper work,
yes.
where we're talking about, like the burnout and exhaustion, and it almost always comes back to they haven't established boundaries, or they haven't maintained them, for fear of other people not being okay, and
Mhm.
them not being like the kind person who just goes along with what everyone else wants and needs.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of times it's having to make that shift to say it's actually kind and loving to have boundaries and to articulate them to others,
Mhm.
and giving people that, right, that permission for themselves to be okay having those boundaries and sharing it with loved ones. So when you're speaking specifically about love and relationships, so often what happens is that when that starts, it's there's some clash, right?
Oh,
Some
yeah.
issues that come up in relationships because maybe it's years or decades of them
Mm,
never speaking up for what they want or need,
mhm.
always being the one that just goes with the flow of what everyone else wants. So it's this like discomfort, and then relationships are deepened and made better
Mhm,
because they're practicing open and honest communication.
mhm.
And there's not that underlying resentment that often happens when we're just expecting people to read our mind, of knowing what we want and need. And so I just think it's so important, and it can just make, these loving relationships so much better.
Mhm.
But yeah, it almost always is a
Yeah,
little icky when you're in the midst of
yeah,
really acknowledging and expressing those boundaries.
totally, totally. I love that you say that too, because I say that too with my clients. Like that we're here to talk about dating and love, but don't be surprised if the other areas of your life start changing, because as you change your internal state,
Mhm.
it's like, holistic approach to abundance, which is what you talk about. It's like everything, like money is not my zone of genius, but like you'll start to see things happening, and then you'll start to see things happening with the way you solve problems and the way that like you're open to possibility and like all these other things. So I love that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
good.
I'm trained as an executive coach too, and I still sometimes do like strictly executive coaching. But
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting because, right,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about, oh, I'm a holistic life coach or relationship coach or whatever, but it's all the same stuff. Like when I'm working
Mm-hmm.
with executives, it's these same things
Mm-hmm.
coming up,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we're talking about boundaries and communication and self-care and all these other things. It doesn't matter if we call it executive coaching or relationship coaching, right? Wherever you go, there you are.
Mm-hmm.
And like we all have the same stuff.
We do. Yeah.
Yeah.
We all have the ability to change, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I love that. Now, one last thing that just came up. When I first started doing this work and first started, practicing yoga and meditation, there just wasn't as much like research out about it, like as readily available as there is now, decades later. And I just think back to like how years ago, decades ago, they didn't know as much about like how as adults we can change, right? The brain can
right.
change and
Yeah.
right. And so I'm thinking when we were just sharing that, like, hey, y'all, it doesn't matter how old you are. We can still make some new pathways and start doing things differently. It's not like, oh, you're too old now to make any differences, which is something I definitely heard years before. Right? It was like, oh, can't teach an old dog new tricks. Yeah. And we're stuck in our ways and there's no possible way for me to change my mind now. Yeah. It's like, hey, no, you can.
Totally.
Something different is actually possible for you.
100%. And the research, it's still, I would say, really fairly new, and it's not mainstream yet. I think it will be, but I think, most of society, I think, does, like, again, like we were talking about, like this whole, like, oh, I got burnout and stress and let's joke about it and all this stuff. Yeah. Well, like, let's see something differently. Let's have the opportunity to look at something a little bit differently. And it is possible. And now the science is backing it up, which is amazing. I totally agree.
Yeah. I love the work that you're doing. And I'm so grateful to be on this podcast and just, chatting with a friend. Yeah. And you are amazing.
So thanks. I love you. And
it's a fun conversation.
I know. Again, I mean, we're talking about like living the life of our dreams, and it's not like some pie in the sky thing. I was pinching myself yesterday when I get these like waves of gratitude of like, who am I? Like, who am I to be living this life? Like, in some respects, I feel like I should be dead or in jail. I'll be real, like based off the behaviors that I've had in the past. But and when we put out this projection, sometimes, and social media can be really difficult sometimes because it doesn't tell the whole story, right? And so that's another podcast, maybe, Larissa, but but yeah, I think like just having these conversations is really like part of my dream life. And so I'm honored to have you here.
Yeah. And one more thing that just popped up when you were talking about being in jail or dead. And I find that forgiveness is such a huge barrier to healing for so many people too, because we look at, things that we've done in the past. And like, well, who are we to be worthy of this amazing life of abundance? And you could do a whole podcast just on that. But right, like so many people just need to forgive themselves so that they actually can heal and move forward, and that they actually are worthy and deserving of living an amazing life.
Yeah. And that's something that I've learned is like forgiveness. I feel like what some people think that forgiveness is on the outside when really it's on the inside. I think it's on the inside. It's, it can be both, AA is like making amends and stuff, but like, does it say like make amends with yourself, and that's where I feel like that's where it starts. But yeah. Woo, we can just keep going, can't we? Where can people find you, Larissa, and all the work that you're doing? Is there something that you're working on right now, or what would you like to share?
Strong by Nature Wellness on most places. The website Strong by Nature Wellness on IG and Facebook and YouTube and all the places. What am I working on right now? I don't even know what.
You're working on, you're living your aligned life.
What am I working on? I love going into organizations. So any organizations that want to have some conversations about burnout prevention and recovery and making a bigger impact about burning out, I love to work with, purpose-driven organizations that are filled with amazing humans like the ones that we've been talking about. And I also love working with people in small groups. I do individuals as well, but I love the community feel of when we do our small group stuff. And I have a healing program that we're starting up next month. And I'm super excited about that, to just bring, purpose driven high achievers together so that we can heal and grow together, so we can live the life of our dreams and make an impact and use our gifts and like actually experience peace.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Well, it's such a pleasure having this conversation. Stay tuned for part 2, y'all. But yes, thank you for coming on today, Larissa.
Aw, thank you.
My pleasure. It's super important to recognize how our perceptions and our patterns about life kind of get normalized. I really like this conversation because we need to keep having conversations about how like normalizing stress and burnout really isn't healthy for us in the long run. People get, they get physical illnesses, they get depressed and high anxiety. In my opinion, anxiety, stress, and burnout, it's not a joke. And this conversation with Larissa really, really brought that home for me. And we do have to realize at some point that there may be a better way for us to live. And I'm here for you. All of these guests on my podcast are here for you too. And thank you for spending time with us today. I'm grateful you're here. You belong here. I love you, and big love.